The funeral hall was quiet. Yun-se standing by the memorials of her deceased parents. The air is heavy with grief as she mourns their loss. Her tears flow freely, and in her heart, she clings to the only family she has left, her grandfather. For as long as she could remember, her grandfather had been her anchor. He was the one who had shielded her after her parents' tragic passing. From that moment on, Yun-se had vowed to do whatever it took to make her grandfather happy. But even the strongest anchors weaken over time. Yun-se had recently discovered a heartbreaking truth. Her grandfather was in the late stages of pancreatic cancer. His remaining days were few, and with what little time he had left, he had made a request. He wanted to see her married before he passed away. Yun-se's heart churned. Marriage? She was too young, and it felt rushed. Yet, her grandfather's concern for her future left her no choice but to consider it. At college, Soo-kun approached Yun-se, her carefree and charming friend who always lightened her mood. An idea stuck in her mind as she suddenly dragged him outside the classroom. Once they were outside, she hesitated for a moment before blurting out, "Soo-kun, would you marry me?" Soo-kun froze, stunned for a moment, then broke into a grin. "Of course. It's sudden, but how could I refuse when you're the one proposing?" he said, then added with a laugh, "But let's marry when we're 30, okay?" Yun-se opened her mouth to explain, but his phone rang, interrupting her. One of his friends invited him to meet some pretty girls nearby. Soo-kun's grin widened. "Sounds fun. Let's continue this tomorrow." Yun-se, "I gotta go now." Yin forced a smile. Okay, go. I was just kidding anyway." Soo-kun chuckled, pinching her cheeks. "I knew it, but still my heart was pounding, you know." With that, he waved and walked off, leaving the campus. Yun watched his retreating figure, her chest tightening. Frustrated, she muttered to herself, "What have I done? What was I expecting from someone who's never serious? Can he take me seriously, just for once? Was my face not serious enough?" Lost in her thoughts, she bumped into someone. Startled, she looked up, apologizing hastily. The man, with an icy demeanor, interrupted her. "Next time, pay attention to where you're walking. Don't daydream." Irritated by his tone, Yin snapped, "If you saw me daydreaming, you could have avoided me. Instead, you walked right into me. You did it on purpose, didn't you?" Before he could respond, a car sped dangerously close to her. In a swift motion, the man grabbed her arm and pulled her to safety. The momentum brought her crashing into his chest, their faces so close that their lips accidentally brushed. Time seemed to freeze for a moment. Realizing what had just happened, the man quickly released her. Yun stumbled, her face turning crimson. "Don't get the wrong idea," he said coldly, brushing off his sleeve. "The car was speeding. I only pulled you to keep you safe." "Yeah, thanks," she stammered. She straightened herself, avoiding his gaze. "Let's just pretend none of this happened. We're both having a bad day." Without waiting for his reply, she turned to leave, but before she could escape, his amused voice cut through the air. "You're not even going to thank me for saving your life." His lips curled into a teasing smirk. Then, with a glint of mischief in his eyes, he added, "Or are you planning to leave without compensating me for that kiss just now?" Yun-se, still reeling from the close call, retorted, "What kiss? Our lips barely touched. Don't act like it's such a big deal." Her voice dripped with sarcasm as she added, "What's the matter? Don't tell me you've never been kissed before." The man smirked. "What makes you think that? If anything, you're the one who looks like they've never kissed anyone before." Irritated, Yin shot back, "What's so special about you? I don't even remember kissing you." His smirk deepened. "Really? People don't usually forget their first kiss so easily." Her anger flared at his teasing tone. "First kiss? You're delusional. For your information, you're the 108th person I've kissed, so forgive me if it wasn't memorable." With that, she spun on her heel, her voice sharp as she added, "And don't talk to me if you see me again, you perverted guy." He stood there, watching her storm off, with amusement dancing in his eyes. "The 108th, huh? Interesting," he muttered, a faint grin lingering as he watched her disappearing figure. Back at campus, Yin-se sat in class, distracted. Her friends laughed and chatted around her, discussing upcoming parties and outings, but she could hardly focus. Soo-yun, ever the life of the group, bantered with the others, his carefree smile brightening the mood. Suddenly, the professor walked in, silencing the chatter. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his tone serious. "Today, we have a special guest lecturer who will be joining us as a lecturer for the next semester." He introduced himself with a calm, steady voice. "Good morning, my name is Kong Junyoung." Yun froze, her eyes widening in disbelief. She clutched her notebook tightly, her face a mixture of shock and mortification. Her mind screamed, the annoying person from yesterday. Her cheeks burned as she ducked lower in her seat. Her panic escalated as his eyes scanned the classroom. She ducked behind her notebook, whispering to herself, "Did I see it wrong? Please let me be wrong." Suddenly, his voice rang out, sharp and clear, cutting through the chatter. "You, the one clutching the book, what's your name?" Startled, Yin fro. "I'm Choi Yoon Seol, sir," she stammered, trying to steady her voice. A playful smirk tugged at his lips. "Miss Choi," he began smoothly, "I never knew that biting a book could help you absorb its content." The class erupted into laughter, and Yoon Se's face turned crimson. Before she could recover, his smirk deepened. "Well then," he said, flipping the page casually, Why don't you explain page 108? Her heart skipped a beat at the deliberate pause before his next words. Oh, my mistake, he added, his tone laced with mischief. I meant page 10.8. His eyes sparkled with amusement as he continued. Go ahead, Miss Choi. Please enlighten us. His smirk widened, clearly enjoying her discomfort. As class ends, Soo-Yoon casually greeted Professor Kong. Why didn't you tell me you'd be teaching here? She asked, her tone light and playful. Let's have a coffee, she added. Kong Jun-young's expression remained polite but distant as he replied. I have something to take care of after this. Also, it's not appropriate for a professor and student to have coffee together. Oh, Soo-Yoon, you know him? One of the classmates asked, surprised. Soo-Yoon replied nonchalantly, yeah, our families know each other. Later, Jun-young, Yun's friend, suggested lunch, craving jimpong, but Yun declined. I'm just going to head straight home. I'm just tired, she said with a weak smile. Walking through the hallway, she noticed Kong Jun-young ahead of her. Gathering her courage, she called out, Mr. Kong, can we talk for a moment? He stopped and turned, his sharp gaze locking onto hers. I'm sorry for how our first meeting went, she began hesitantly. But can we not bring our issue into class? Don't you remember me? His smirk returned, a hint of amusement in his eyes. I never bring personal issues into my class. I act like a professor who advises his students. His voice dipped slightly, carrying a hint of sarcasm. Don't be arrogant. Her mouth opened in shock, but no words came out as he turned and walked away. She stood there, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. Later that evening, back in her apartment, Yun's phone buzzed. It was her grandfather calling. She answered quickly. Yun-say, how are you? He asked cheerfully. I'm good, Grandpa. How about you? She replied. I'm doing well. Listen, I'll be in the city this Saturday to meet an old friend's son. You should join us. Well, I don't have any plans, so sure, she said. Great. I'll pick you up then. See you soon. The call ended, leaving her staring at her phone. The next day arrived with a crispness in the air, and Yun-se found herself accompanying her grandfather to a luxurious estate. Kong Tae-jin, her grandfather, called out with warmth as the host approached. The owner of such a large company shouldn't need to personally greet guests to the front gate. Yun-se's grandfather teased lightly. But I had to come out. I wanted to meet this young lady, Kong Tae-jin replied, chuckling as she bowed politely. Her grandfather introduced her to King Tae-jin and his wife, Hao Kyung. These are the children of my late friend, Kong Dong-woo. They were also close friends with your parents and the owner of TJ Corporation. It's lovely to meet you, Yun-se said with a warm smile. You've grown into such a beautiful young lady, Tae-jin said warmly. Come inside, Hao Kyung added, motioning them toward the grand entrance. As they walked, Tae-jin said, your family has contributed so much to mine. Without you, TJ Corp wouldn't be where it is today. Don't say that, her grandfather interjected, waving off the compliment. As they entered the home, Tae-jin sighed, his voice tinged with guilt. Yun-se, I regret not reaching out after your parents' passing. I should have. Hao Kyung gently cut him off, her tone soft and comforting. Let's not bring up something so heavy now, dear. Tae-jin quickly shifted the mood with a warm smile. Yun-se, if you're willing, consider yourself part of our family. I'd be thrilled to finally have a daughter, maybe even a younger sibling and an older brother for my kids. Hao Kyung shook her head with a playful smile. Tae-jin, you're going to embarrass her. You've always wanted a daughter, and now you're jumping at the chance. Tae-jin turned, gesturing with pride. Oh, there he is, our second son, Kong Ji-ho. Say hello. The young man bowed politely. Nice to meet you. I'm Kong Ji-ho. As they continued chatting, the sound of confident footsteps echoed down the hallway. Everyone turned just as the firstborn son entered the room. The air grew tense for a moment as Yun-se locked eyes with none other than Kong Jun-young, the man who had saved her from that speeding car just days ago. Her eyes widened in shock. Both of them froze, their eyes locking in disbelief at the sheer unexpectedness of the moment. Outside the house, Jun-young broke the silence first. Fate really has a sense of humor, doesn't it? He said, his voice laced with amusement. Yun took a deep breath, trying to suppress her irritation. Why don't we start over? Thank you for saving my life, she said, her tone polite but guarded. Jun-young's eyes glinted with mischief as he replied. Oh, you said you didn't remember, but now it seems like you do remember that. Hey, Yun-se interrupted sharply, her face heating up. No need for details, and yes, I remember everything, sir, she added, the last word with an awkward smile. He chuckled softly. Apart from class, just call me Jun-young. Yun-se straightened her posture and shook her head. How could I? You're older and clearly much more experienced. Apart from class, just call me Jun-young. Apart from class, just call me Jun-young. You mean first kiss experience, but I can't compare to you. You've had it 108 times. Her face burned red as she stammered, glaring at him. He chuckled, unbothered. Isn't that right, Miss Choi? Her frustration boiled over. You're impossible. Because of my grandfather and your parents, I'm trying to be civil, but she jabbed her finger toward him. Be careful. Outside, we don't know each other, understand? With a casual shrug, he replied, exactly what I want. No need to pretend to be nice. Leaning slightly closer, he added, it doesn't suit me anyway. As he turned to leave, Yun stood frozen, her fists clenched as irritation simmered within her. Back at the college, Yun confided in her friend, revealing that she was looking for a potential partner to marry and had even proposed to Soo-Kwon. Shocked, her friend exclaimed, How can you just marry anyone like that? She then scolded Yin. You need someone mature and established, not just anyone. Suddenly, her friend's expression brightened as an idea struck her. I know, my aunt runs a matchmaking business. Let's arrange a blind date for you. Without waiting for a response, she added decisively, I'll set it up for this Saturday. On Saturday, at a hotel, Yin-se sat waiting for her matchmaking partner to arrive. When he finally appeared, he introduced himself politely, but soon began rambling endlessly about his own good looks. The following Saturday, she met another man who was overly cautious about diet and wouldn't even let her eat freely. As the weeks went by, Yin met various men. Some were overly bold, hitting on her directly, while others believed in ghosts and shared unsettling, scary stories. It was becoming clear to her just how difficult it was to find a suitable match. However, one Saturday, she met a man who seemed genuine. As she entertained the thought, she accidentally dropped her teacup. The man quickly offered her his handkerchief, a small gesture that sparked a glimmer of hope within her. Perhaps there was still a chance to find a decent man. At the same hotel, on the other side, Jun-young sat in a chair, arguing over the phone with his mother. Why do you make promises without consulting me first? He said, his tone laced with irritation. His mother calmly explained, it wasn't me. My friend wanted to introduce her daughter to you after seeing how well your company is performing. As soon as the call ended, someone called his name. A young woman stood in front of him, smiling brightly. Remembering his mother's words, Jun-young regarded her with a serious expression and asked, You look familiar. Have we met before? The girl smiled brightly and replied, Yes, we met last year at Prince Ivan's birthday party. Without waiting for a response, she began rambling about how she could help him expand his business by leveraging her connection with the prince. Jun-young listened, visibly annoyed with her relentless chatter. Finally, he stood up and said politely, It was nice meeting you, but I have some work to attend to. I should get going. The girl quickly suggested that she had arrived at an inconvenient time and offered to leave first. As she walked toward the exit, Jun-young let out a sigh and sat back in his chair, relieved to finally have some peace. On the other side of the hotel, Yun's meeting seemed to be going well. As they engaged in conversation, the man started politely asking about her family. However, his tone shifted when he revealed, I spent 30 million just to meet someone on my level. Yin-se was taken aback, her shock evident on her face. Noticing her reaction, the man suddenly grabbed her hand and said, Don't lie to me. I know people like you low class, desperate. Follow me to the room, or I'll report you. Her anger flared, and she retorted, Report me to the police. I'm not afraid. Just then, a familiar voice echoed through the air. Jun-young, who was passing by, stopped in his tracks. The man continued, ignoring her defiance. If you want money, I can help you get quickly. Yin clenched her teeth, trying to control her temper. Before the man could say more, his hand was firmly grabbed by someone else. Startled, Yin looked up, only to see Jun-young standing there, glaring at the man with an icy expression. His grip tightened, causing the man to wince and stumble backward in pain. Without a word, Jun-young grabbed Yun's hand and swiftly led her out of the scene. Struggling to keep up with his pace, Yin stumbled behind him. Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there, she said breathlessly. She glanced down at her hand and added, You can let go now, Jun-young. He released her hand and asked, So, you were here for a blind date? Irritated, she replied, Whatever it is, it's none of your business. Jun-young turned to her and, with a smirk, remarked, Judging by how you're dressed, it must have been a date, unless what that guy said was true. Her face flushed, and she quickly denied it. She sat down on a nearby chair with a sigh. Taking a deep breath, she explained, My grandfather is ill. This was his last wish to see me married. My friend's aunt runs a matchmaking agency, so I decided to try this. Jun-young's expression grew serious as he asked, I thought marriage and love were every woman's dream. Is it really okay to go on blind dates like this? Sighing again, she replied, It's not easy, but I don't need love for my grandfather's happiness. I just want the title of wife. Jun-young stared at her intently, as though deep in thought. She added softly, I thought the man earlier was a good person. I thought I could finally make my grandfather's wish come true. Jun-young pulled up a chair beside her, sitting down without a word. He appeared to be calculating something in his mind before he finally glanced at her and said, Choi Yoon Seol, just marry me. Yin froze for a moment, completely taken aback. A second later, she laughed nervously. You must be joking. His expression remained serious as he replied, Didn't you say you wouldn't refuse if someone asked you to marry them? Her laughter faded. Yes, but why does it have to be you? Jun-young leaned forward slightly and said calmly, Because it's beneficial for both of us. We meet each other's criteria, and our families know each other. Your grandfather will be happy if you marry me. Suspicious, she asked. And what do you get out of this? I need the status of a husband, just like you need the title of wife, he replied. Realization dawned on her, and her eyes widened. Wait, are you also here for? Yes, he interrupted. I don't want to waste my time on blind dates. If I marry someone else, I'd have to deal with their feelings, but you only care about the title. It's convenient for both of us. She looked at him thoughtfully and mumbled, I can't imagine us getting married. Then, after a pause, she said, Can I have some time to think? With a confident smile, Jun-young replied, Fine, I'll give you 3 days. On the third day, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, meet me at the parking lot where we first met. If you don't show up, that means you are rejecting my offer. 3 days later, at the parking lot, Jun Young stood, waiting as promised. He glanced at his watch. It was 4:50 in the afternoon. His eyes scanned the quiet, empty path ahead. Minutes ticked by, and he checked the time again. Now it was 5:10. Disappointed, he unlocked his car door, thinking to himself, what was I even expecting by coming here? Just as he was about to get into the car, someone called out his name. He turned to see Yoon Se running toward him, slightly out of breath. Sorry. I'm so sorry I'm late, she said, panting. My class ended later than expected. Jun Young's expression remained serious as he replied, You're 10 minutes late. Still trying to catch her breath, she responded, I'm here to accept your offer, but I have one condition. She straightened herself and looked at him firmly. I want this marriage to stay a secret, at least until I graduate. You're quite popular on campus, and if this gets out, it could be a disaster for me. Jun Young's lips curled into a faint smile as he nodded. Very well. He extended his hand for a handshake and said, In that case, nice working with you, Miss Choi. But he suddenly pulled her forward, and she stumbled into his arms. He held her steady, his grip firm. Startled, she placed her hands on his chest, pushing against him. What are you doing? Just hugging me like that? She exclaimed. With a smirk, he leaned in slightly and said, Well, aren't we a couple now? We should start looking like one. At the Kong mansion, during dinner, the atmosphere grew tense as everyone turned their attention to Jun Young, who had just announced he had some news to share. With a steady expression, he stated, I'm going to marry Choi Yoon Seol. His father's face lit up with happiness. Mr. Choi's granddaughter? That's wonderful news, he exclaimed. In contrast, Mrs. Kang's expression clouded with concern. His father nodded approvingly. I had a feeling about this when they visited us, but I wasn't sure. Jun Young responded calmly. We've been dating for quite some time, but I didn't know our parents were acquainted. Mrs. Kang interrupted, her voice firm yet restrained. How long have you two been in a relationship? You were only teaching at her campus last week. Isn't this marriage decision a bit rushed? Jun Young met her gaze evenly. We've been dating long before I started teaching at her campus. I simply didn't tell you, he replied smoothly. Then, with a faint smile, he added, and that's why I dislike it when you push me into blind dates with your friends' daughters. Don't worry, mother. I'm marrying Yoon Se because I love her. Mrs. Kang's eyes widened slightly, a wave of panic washing over her as she thought. Does he even know what love really is? Irritated, she clenched the fork in her hand tightly, though her expression remained composed. With a forced smile, she said, Jun Young, why don't you bring her here? I'd like to talk to her myself. On the phone, Yin was stunned by the news. Worried, she asked, what if she gets suspicious? Jun Young's tone remained calm as he replied, just stick to the plan. Answer everything as we discussed. I'll wait for you at the usual spot. Don't be late. As the call ended, Yin stared at her phone, anxiety swirling in her chest. How am I supposed to stay calm? She thought. The next day, at the Kong house, Mrs. Kong greeted her with a disappointed tone. How could Jun Young leave you alone like this? Awkwardly, Yoon Se responded. He had an urgent matter to attend to, so I came alone. Mrs. Kong studied her for a moment, then said, Taekyung already told us about the marriage, but you're still in college. Isn't this a bit rushed? Yoon straightened her posture and replied firmly, We've decided to keep it a secret until I graduate. Suspicious, Mrs. Kong pressed further, her tone slightly sharp. How long have you two been dating? And why didn't you inform us earlier? Sensing the tension, Yoon tried to ease her concern. We're really serious about this, she said, her voice steady. Mrs. Kong seemed to calm slightly, her expression softened. It's not that I dislike you, she said thoughtfully. I just have a few questions. She looked directly at Yoon, her gaze serious. Do you really love my son? Trying her best to appear sincere, Yoon replied, Yes, I love him with all my heart. Mrs. Kong narrowed her eyes and asked again, Does Jun Young love you? Yoon Se froze, her mind racing for an answer. Before she could respond, a familiar voice interrupted. Mom, shouldn't you be asking me that? Startled, Yin turned as Jun Young entered the room, wrapping his arm around her shoulders and pulling her close, trapping her in his embrace. He addressed Mrs. Kong. I told you we love each other. What more should I do to convince you? He looked down at Yin, a playful smile tugging at his lips. Mom isn't asking you anything strange, is she, honey? Awkwardly, Yin Se shook her head and replied, No, she's just worried about you. Mrs. Kong observed the exchange quietly, her worry deepening. As they left the house, Yin complained, Did you really need to act like that? She said, her tone frustrated. Jun Young replied casually, How else will Mom believe us? You didn't need to hug me, she retorted. He smirked slightly. You should have seen your face when she asked you those questions. You looked so awkward, especially when I hugged you. She huffed. How can I not be awkward? We barely know each other, and you didn't even warn me beforehand. As they reached her home, she muttered a polite thanks and tried to get out of the car, but before she could, Jun Young caught her hand and pulled it to his lips, pressing a kiss to it. It seems like we need to practice, he said with a teasing smile. Her eyes widened, and her face turned crimson. Practice? She murmured, flustered. Yes, practice, he replied. We need to look like a real couple every chance we get. She yanked her hand away and shot back. No, we don't need that. I can manage just fine. He teased, see? You're already confused, just like now. Leaning closer, he hovered over her, his gaze playful, especially when her face grew even redder as the heat rose to her cheeks. Panicked, she pushed him back. I said I don't need it, she exclaimed before hurriedly getting out of the car. As she was leaving, her phone rang. Seeing it was her grandfather, she answered quickly. On the other end, Her grandfather's voice was warm and amused. You should have told me earlier, and I would have agreed to your marriage then and there. Hearing his happiness, a smile tugged at her lips, though a pang of nervousness hit her. It's too late to back out now, she thought. After the call ended, she turned back toward the car. Leaning down through the window, she said, well, let's practice then. Inside the car, as she leaned closer to him, she asked hesitantly, do we really need to practice kissing? He glanced at her, his eyes glinting with mischief. What do you think? Without waiting for an answer, he grabbed her by the neck and gently cupped her face. The next second, his lips captured hers. She froze, her eyes wide with shock as the moment stretched. Their kiss deepened, drawing her further into it. After what felt like an eternity, Jun-young pulled back with a small smile. That was a wedding kiss, he said casually, brushing his thumb against her lips. We're getting married soon, so it's only right to practice for it, don't you think? Still flustered, she nodded wordlessly and quickly left. Inside the car, Jun-young leaned back, rubbing the back of his neck. His cheeks flushed slightly as he replayed what had just happened. The next day, at college, as Yoon-se glanced at her friends, she recalled her conversation with Jun-young. We're keeping it a secret, but can I tell one of my friends? I need someone to be there for me, she had asked, and he had agreed. Looking at her friends now, she hesitated, unsure who to confide in. Later, as she walked with Yoon-gun, she gathered her courage and said, I need to talk to you about something. Yoon-gun grinned teasingly. What is it? Are you getting married or something? Awkwardly, Yoon replied, actually, yeah. Yoon-gun froze, her eyes wide in shock. What? Who? Not wanting anyone else to overhear, Yoon-se led her to a quiet spot. Once they were alone, she took a deep breath and said, I'm going to marry Mr. Kong. Yoon-gun pointed at her accusingly. I knew it. I knew something was going on between you two. Sure, keep it down, Yoon whispered, trying to calm her. Only you know about this, so please keep it a secret. Her friend nodded and hugged her tightly. Congratulations. You finally found a way. But after a moment, Yoon-gun's smile faded into concern. But why is he proposing marriage? What's his reason? Yoon-se decided to be honest. He's the same as me. He needs the status and doesn't want to waste time. Yoon-gun thought for a moment before asking, wait, could it be that he's the one who saved you from all those blind dates before? Before Yoon-se could answer, Yoon-gun grinned mischievously. He's like your white knight, isn't he? Riding on a white horse to save the day? As Yoon-gun's imagination ran wild, Yoon-se rolled her eyes, but before she could respond, Soo-kun appeared behind them. What are you two whispering about? He asked cheerfully, leading them toward the campus cafe. In a coffee shop, Jun-young sat quietly, sipping his coffee as he glanced outside. His eyes caught a group of 3 people approaching the cafe, laughing together. His gaze lingered on the one person among them he was about to marry, Yoon-se. Her bright smile lit up her face, and for a moment, he couldn't tear his eyes away. Suddenly, a voice interrupted his thoughts. Jun-young. He turned to see Soo-yoon standing nearby. Hello, Soo-yoon, he replied calmly. Soo-yoon took a seat beside him with a cheerful smile. If I'd known you were coming here, I would have joined you earlier, she said casually. As they chatted, the group entered the cafe. Spotting Soo-yoon, Soo-kun waved enthusiastically. Soo-yoon. Oh, and Mr. Kong is here too, he said, his voice full of surprise. Soo-kun turned to Jun-young with excitement. We're going out to eat. Would you and Soo-yoon like to join us? Jun-young glanced at Yoon-se, who was subtly signaling him to decline the invitation. A smirk tugged at his lips as he ignored her silent plea. Turning back to Soo-kun, he replied, okay, I'll join. Great, let's go now, Soo-kun said, his excitement evident. As they sat in the restaurant, Yoon-se couldn't shake the discomfort of Jun-young's presence. The atmosphere felt tense, and she couldn't relax. Soo-kun, as usual, offered her a half-cooked egg, a gesture he always made when they ate together. You like this, right? He said, placing on her plate. Jun-young noticed the gesture, his gaze lingering on them. Noticing his stare, Soo-kun explained with a cheerful smile. Yoon-se is from Gaj Island. She loves eggs on top. It's a thing there. Jun-young smiled lightly. Oh, I didn't know that, he said, turning to Yoon-se. When did you move to Seoul then? Before Yoon-se could answer, Soo-kun chimed in again. She moved here when college started. Before that, she was living in Gaj with her grandfather. Yoon felt awkward and thought, why can't he just shut his mouth? Her thoughts were interrupted when Soo-kun took food from her bowl with his chopsticks. Frustrated, she snapped, hey, don't use your chopsticks in my food. Here, take all of it now. Soo-yoon, observing their exchange, laughed. Oh, you two have such a cute bond. Soo-kun grinned, putting his arm around Yoon's shoulders. Yeah, we're really close friends. Jun-young remained silent, his expression unreadable as he watched the interaction. Yoon, however, felt something wasn't right. Yoon-gun sighed quietly, thinking about how strange the situation felt. After finishing their meal, Soo-kun and Soo-yoon excused themselves, waving goodbye as they left for their club activities. The remaining 3 waved back, and Yoon-gun, sensing the tension, spoke up. I think it's better if I head out too. Yoon-se wanted to leave with her, but before she could, Jun-young grabbed her bag from behind, stopping her. Noticing this, she simply said, okay, you go first. Once the others were gone, Jun-young looked at her and said bluntly, you should have told me earlier that you have a boyfriend. It's uncomfortable for me. Irritated, Yoon snapped, he isn't my boyfriend. She glared at him and added, and why did you even agree to come? Jun Young replied calmly. We agreed to keep our relationship secret on campus, but that doesn't mean we don't know each other. I was just being natural in front of my students. Looking at him, Yin thought, I know it's not a real marriage, but how can he stay so calm? As he started to leave, he commanded, come with me to the car. Feeling a pang of sadness, she thought, what do I even expect from someone like Mr. Kong? Suddenly, he extended his hand toward her. Shocked, she asked what? He replied smoothly, we should practice whenever we have the opportunity, right? She hesitated, staring at him for a moment. Finally, she placed her hand in his. As they walked together, hand in hand, she thought, after all, this relationship is supposed to be without feelings, right? Determined, she resolved, if he can be cold, then so can I. When they reached the car, Jun Young opened the door and commented, I notice you're still uncomfortable holding hands. Then, with a slight smirk, he added, you should be skilled at this by now, considering you've kissed 108 times. Yoon Se glared at him, unsure whether to be angry or just let it slide. Deciding there was no harm in following along, she replied simply, sorry. Trying to improve, she grabbed his hand again and asked, like this? Or maybe like this? Experimenting with different ways to hold hands, she added, which one looks more romantic? Jun Young intertwined his fingers with hers, holding her hand firmly. Like this, he said with a steady gaze. Yin Se looked at him, feeling the warmth of his hand. For a moment, she didn't know how to respond, her heart fluttering despite herself. As Yin Se chatted with Yin Gun, her friend expressed concern about the nature of her marriage. It's legally binding, but it's still not real. How long do you two plan to keep pretending? Yin Gun asked seriously. Yin Se thought to herself, she's right. I need to come up with a plan. She pondered. Jun Young is a successful businessman. It's unlikely he hasn't thought all of this through. But what about me? Am I just going to follow his steps without considering my own? The next day, inside Jun Young's car, she handed him a paper. What's this? He asked, his brow furrowing. It's a letter of agreement, she replied confidently. You take one copy. It's a marriage agreement to make sure neither of us is at a disadvantage. Jun Young examined the paper carefully. That's correct, he murmured, reading through the points. The first point, maintaining confidentiality about the marriage, makes sense, but marital status would be a better term. It's clearer that way. He glanced at her. I don't have a problem with the first point, but if you're telling one of your friends, I'll tell one of mine. Moving on, he read the second point, behaving appropriately. I'm okay with this one too. Then he got to the third point, personal lives are separate, he read aloud. Before he could comment, she interrupted. Yes, we're not actually married, so we're free to do as we please. He smirked, raising an eyebrow. So, you can go out with your boyfriend? Her glare sharpened. It's not like that. His eyes twinkled mischievously as he continued reading. I disagree with the fourth point, he said suddenly. How will our families believe us if we're not affectionate in front of them? She explained firmly, it doesn't have to be all the time, and you need to inform me beforehand. He shook his head. That's not practical. We'll need to improvise, but we're not going to meet often, she countered. We can plan ahead. He leaned back casually, dropping a bombshell. Oh, I forgot to mention, after we're married, my mother wants us to stay at the family house until you graduate. It's one of her conditions. Her eyes narrowed. And you're telling me this now? Ignoring her irritation, he continued. That's why points 4 and 5 should be removed. As for point 6 foot, he paused, glancing at her. If your grandfather passes away, there's no longer any benefit for you. So I understand. Her frustration boiled over. Why does 5 have to be removed? I think it's unnecessary, he replied simply. Leaning closer, his smirk deepened as he asked, what do you think I'd do? Do something to you? He paused, his gaze piercing. Are you afraid of being swayed? Her cheeks flushed with anger as she glared at him. Fine, she gritted out, crossing out 4 but 5 stays. I'll modify 4 instead. She handed him the revised agreement. He read it aloud, not sleeping in the same beads. She replied firmly, this marriage is business, not emotional, right? Without further argument, he grabbed the paper and signed it. She watched him seriously before saying, once you're done, close your eyes. He frowned slightly, confused. Why? Before he could process her words, he noticed her leaning toward him, her eyes closed. He froze, his mind racing. She opened her eyes slightly, realizing his hesitation. Flustered, she grabbed his cheeks. Sorry, I forgot to take off my hat. I was just practicing the wet. Before she could finish, he reached out, removed her hat, and tossed it aside. In one swift motion, he leaned in, cupping her face. A wedding kiss, he murmured, his voice low, is initiated by the groom. Her heartbeat quickened as he drew closer, his gaze locked onto hers. Her breath hitched as he pressed his lips to hers, the kiss deepening as they both became lost in the moment, realizing its significance. As the days passed and the wedding day drew closer, Yinse's phone buzzed constantly with updates, bookings for venues, arrangements for the ceremony, and countless details. She visited each place with Jun Young's mother, whether it was shopping for their bedroom, tasting wedding cakes, or trying on wedding dresses. One afternoon, as she slipped into her wedding dress and stood before the mirror, a wave of realization hit her. This marriage, though a contract for mutual benefit, was still very real. She stared at her reflection, her emotions swirling. The ceremony was set to take place at their family home on Gaj Island. Walking through the garden, she noticed the flurry of preparations, the decorations, the flowers, the tables being set, but she couldn't understand why she didn't feel happy inside. Inside the house, her aunt approached her with a concerned expression. Where's Jun Young? I haven't seen him yet, her aunt said, sighing. He should be here by now. Hearing those words, a pang of unease struck Yun's heart, and emptiness she couldn't quite define began to settle over her. Suddenly, someone called her name. She turned toward the door, and there he was, her husband-to-be, standing with his luggage, his face calm but welcoming. Relief washed over her as she saw him, her heart unexpectedly lifting. Noticing her expression, Jun Young walked over, gently taking the box she was holding. Sorry, he said. I came without letting you know. Before they could continue, her aunt appeared, and Yun quickly introduced her to Jun Young as her aunt. As Jun Young and her aunt chatted about the upcoming ceremony, Yun's gaze lingered on him without realizing it. A smile began to form on her face. She felt a genuine sense of calm and happiness. At night, at the Choi house, everyone gathered around the dinner table, casually chatting. Yun's aunt scolded her gently. You need to eat more, or you'll faint on your wedding day. Yun protested. I can't eat too much. Aunt, my dress won't fit. Jun Young, sitting nearby, interjected with a calm assurance. Don't worry, Aunt. After we're married, I'll make sure she eats plenty. Yun-se nodded. See? Now you can relax. Her aunt smiled warmly, commenting, it's no surprise that Yun-se said she fell in love at first sight. Hearing this, Jun Young raised an eyebrow and turned to her. Oh really? She never told me that. Her grandfather chimed in with a chuckle. That's just how she is. She doesn't always say what she feels, but she will love you wholeheartedly. Later, as Yun prepared a room for Jun Young, he entered with his luggage. Glancing around, he asked, is this your room? Yeah, she replied. I'll sleep in my aunt's room tonight. If this feels uncomfortable, then I'm sorry, she added hesitantly. It's fine, he replied simply. She asked softly, why didn't you tell me earlier you were coming? I would have prepared a better room for you. He looked at her for a moment, then raised his hand and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Because my future wife didn't bother contacting me the day before our wedding. What else could I do but come find her myself? Caught off guard, she looked at him, and he smiled faintly. Thank you for coming, she said sincerely. Jun Young's smile deepened as he leaned closer, pressing a light kiss to her forehead. Pulling away, he said softly, good night, my bride. Her heart unexpectedly fluttering. On the wedding day, everything was set for the ceremony to begin. As Jun Young got ready, his friend remarked, I can't believe you're getting married. A few days ago, you were going on blind dates arranged by your mom. Who's the bride anyway? With a smirk, Jun Young replied, definitely not someone I met on a blind date. His friend's tone turned serious. Then who? Ignoring the question, Jun Young knocked on the door of the room where Yun-se was getting ready. Her friend opened the door and said, she's not ready yet. But Jun Young persisted. I'll only be a moment, he assured her. Stepping inside, he called out, Yun-se? But as he looked up, he froze, his eyes widening. Standing there was Yun-se, dressed as a stunning bride in her wedding gown. Noticing his stare, she asked, yes? Realizing he had been standing silently for too long, Jun Young cleared his throat and gestured to his friend. This is my business partner and groomsman. I thought I'd introduce him. She bowed politely to the man and then introduced her friend to Jun Young's friend. After exchanging pleasantries, Jun Young reminded his friend, since this is a secret marriage, don't let anyone at the office find out. His friend nodded. Got it. Yun's friend added, me too. I'll leave you two for now. Before leaving, they both advised, just relax, okay? After the door closed, Yun looked at Jun Young nervously. Do we really look that tense? Jun Young replied confidently, I'm not. Are you? Of course I am, she exclaimed. If our act gets exposed, my grandfather will be devastated. Placing a hand on her chest, she added, so this is what it feels like. No wonder people sometimes run away on their wedding day. Jun Young stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. So, as they suggested, should we practice kissing to relax? He leaned in, his face drawing closer to hers, their lips just inches apart. But if we do, you'll have to redo your makeup, he teased with a smirk. Flustered, she pushed him away. Why are you always thinking about kissing? You're such a pervert. Jun Young chuckled, stepping back with an amused smile. See? Now you're not nervous anymore, are you? She stood there, bewildered, watching him leave. What just happened? She thought, her heart racing. Under the soft shadow at the wedding venue, Jun Young stood waiting for his bride, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. Soon, she appeared Yun-se, holding her grandfather's hand, walking slowly and shyly toward him. As their eyes met, her heartbeat quickened, and she instinctively looked down, unable to hold his gaze. Jun Young, however, remained composed, his eyes never leaving her as she approached. When they finally reached him, Jun Young, unable to wait any longer, extended his hand toward her. Her grandfather glanced at his outstretched hand, then gently placed Yun's hand into Jun Young's, sealing the moment with a silent gesture of trust. The ceremony continued, and as they exchanged rings, their families couldn't contain their happiness, smiles lighting up their faces. Suddenly, the groomsman announced, now it's time for the kiss to seal the wedding vows, making Yun-se tense visibly. Jun Young whispered softly, now's the time to show the results of our practice. Relax, you look stiff. As he reached up to remove her veil, she whispered back nervously, but we didn't practice in front of this many people. He chuckled lightly, his smile reassuring. Just close your eyes, he whispered. She glanced at him with wide eyes before slowly closing them, trusting his words. Jun Young leaned in, his face mere inches from hers, and in the next moment, their lips met, sealing their wedding with a kiss. The crowd erupted in applause, and with that kiss, they were officially declared Mr. and Mrs. Kong. And that's a wrap. Thanks for watching. If you're excited for the next chapter, let me know by dropping a comment and hitting that like button. Your feedback helps me decide when to release the next one, so stay tuned, and I'll drop it soon. Their parents left. Yoon Seol and Junyoung bid them farewell, thanking them for everything. Once alone, an awkward silence filled the room. Breaking it, Junyoung asked, "Should you go take a bath first, or should I?" "Oh, you go first. I'll tidy up my things," Yoon Seol replied. "All right," Junyoung nodded, heading toward the bathroom. Left alone, she stood by the bed, lost in thought. Starting tonight, this room was theirs. The large bed was just enough for two, their clothes neatly arranged side by side, and all their shared items made the marriage feel undeniably real, especially with Junyoung's presence. Junyoung soon returned dressed in his nightwear. "I'm done. You can take a bath now," he said. "Did you finish tidying up?" "Yeah. Most of it was done by your mother already," she answered while opening a gift box from her friend Yongun. Noticing Junyoung's pajamas, she commented, "Oh, you're wearing the pajamas Aunt gifted." She insisted on matching sets. Suddenly, her eyes widened in shock as she opened the box further. Hurriedly, she slammed it shut. "What's that?" Junyoung asked curiously. "Oh, nothing. Just a gift from Gyeonggun," she replied awkwardly. "Is it for both of us?" "Let me see," he said, stepping closer. "You don't have to." Before she could finish, their tug-of-war over the box caused it to fly open, spilling its contents. A very revealing, sexy nightgown. "Hey, don't look. I didn't ask for it," she yelped, frantically picking it up. "I didn't say anything," Junyoung replied, smirking. "You seem nervous." "What exactly are you thinking, Yoon Seol?" She spun around, eyes wide. "Who's nervous?" she barked. "It's just my first time sharing a room with a man, so I'm being cautious." "You're the one who's nervous, afraid I'll do something, right?" Junyoung stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We're husband and wife. We can do it any time." He brushed his thumb against her lips. "How about it?" Her hands instinctively pressed against his chest. "How about what?" she stammered, face burning. Without another word, he leaned in, his lips grazing hers before sealing them in a deep kiss. Her eyes widened, but soon fluttered shut as she clutched his shirt. Caught in the moment, he opened his eyes mid-kiss, smirking when he noticed her reaction. Pulling back, he whispered, "Wait, everyone's still up, so we better not go beyond this." Her face turned crimson. "Who said anything about going beyond? Besides, it's in the contract. We're not sleeping in the same bed." He chuckled. "Well, it seems like we'll have to be patient until our honeymoon." Does this man ever listen? Yoon Seol thought, exasperated. As night deepened in the Kong household, Yoon Seol sat on the bed, sneaking glances at Junyoung, who sat on the sofa busy with his tablet. "Calm down, Yoon Seol. Newlyweds' first nights are special, but think of him as a roommate. He won't do anything," she reassured herself. "If you want to turn off the light, it's okay," Junyoung said casually. Glancing over, he noticed her already asleep, sitting upright on the bed. He stared for a moment before quietly raising the covers and wrapping his arms around her, laying her down comfortably. His gaze lingered on her serene face, his eyes drifting to her ample bosom and then to her slightly parted lips. He couldn't seem to look away, but eventually tucked the blanket around her securely and brushed her hair behind her ear. She stirred slightly, murmuring in her sleep before turning over and resting soundly. Morning came swiftly. The alarm rang loudly, jolting Yoon Seol awake. Sitting straight up, she thought, since when did I fall asleep? Looking toward the sofa, she saw it empty. "Don't tell me." She frantically checked the other side of the bed, but found it empty as well. "Where is he?" "Downstairs." She greeted her in-laws warmly. "Good morning, father." "Good morning, mother." "Oh, did you sleep well?" Mr. Kong asked kindly. "Good morning, dear." "Yes, we did." "How about you?" Before she could answer, Mrs. Kong interjected. "Where's Junyoung?" "I'm here," came a voice from behind. Turning around, they saw Junyoung looking like he had just returned from a run. "Oh, Junyoung," Mrs. Kong scolded. "Exercising on a day like this? You should be with your wife on her first day here." "Sorry, Mom," he said sincerely. "Go take a shower and come back down," she urged, pushing him gently toward the stairs. As he walked past, he glanced back and saw Yoon Seol chatting comfortably with his family. She also looked back, but only to see him leaving. "He's in the kitchen," Mrs. Kong mentioned. "Since you have classes to attend, you don't need to help with cooking, dear." "Oh, but I can help," Yoon Seol offered, feeling responsible. After finishing breakfast, Junyoung stood up. "Thank you for the meal. I'm off to work now." He turned to Yoon Seol, gently placing his hand on her waist. He whispered close to her ear, "You finished your breakfast, dear? I'll be going now." His family watched the affectionate display with warm smiles. Feeling flustered but playing along, Yoon lightly wrapped her arms around him. "I'm done, so I'll walk you to the front." Once outside, Junyoung smirked. "Your acting's getting better, Yoon. It almost looks natural." He paused, tilting his head. "Or are you starting to enjoy your new status?" Feeling self-conscious, she cautiously asked, "Not really, but I have to ask, did you really sleep on the sofa last night?" He put a hand on his shoulder, feigning a pained expression. "Yes, now my whole body's sore." "Do you think your husband is as filthy as a germ that you won't even sleep with me?" "That was part of the agreement," she barked. He glanced back, watching her reddening cheeks with amusement. His smirk deepened, thoroughly enjoying the anger in her expression. Later, as Yoon sat in the bus, Junyoung's words replayed in her mind. What does he mean by that, she wondered. Does he want me to feel uncomfortable, so I'll let him sleep on the same bed? She sighed. It's only the first day, and things are already this complicated. I didn't think becoming Kong Junyang's wife would be harder than I expected. He's so unpredictable. How should I behave around him? Can't he just act in a way that makes this marriage easier? Her gaze drifted to the wedding ring on her finger, and a realization struck her. She shouldn't wear her wedding ring at school. Stopping by a nearby shop, she bought a few fashion rings to wear instead. Now wearing multiple rings on her fingers, she headed to class. In the classroom, Soyeon asked Young-Yun, "You really haven't seen Yoon Seol?" Frustrated, she snapped, "How many times are you going to ask me that?" "No, I haven't." Just then, Yoon rushed in, breathing heavily. So immediately jumped from his seat. "Hey, Yoon, sit here," he called out, waving. As she settled in, he added, "I saved the seat for you." "Oh, thanks," she replied. "Where were you? It's so unlike you to be late. You look exhausted, so observed." "I'm fine," she said hesitantly. I moved houses." "Oh, where to?" he asked curiously. "It's a bit far, about 40 minutes away," she explained. "Why?" "Your old place was close to campus," he pressed further. Before she could answer, Jaeon chimed in. "Her grandfather was really worried about her, so she's staying with relatives now." "Right. That's correct." Yunil agreed with an awkward smile. Noticing the rings on her fingers, Sookin grabbed her hand. "Since when did you start wearing rings?" he asked, curious. Before she could answer, he concluded with a grin. "Oh, you're following the latest trend, huh?" As they bickered playfully, Junyong entered the class, his sharp eyes noticing the scene before him. Late that night, Junyong returned home, unbuttoning his shirt as he entered the living room. "Do you always come home this late?" Yunil's voice startled him. "I thought you'd be asleep by now," he replied. "Not yet. I still have some assignments to finish," she explained. "Why don't you study in the study room?" "Or were you waiting for me?" he teased. "Don't flatter yourself. I told you I was studying," she retorted. "Do you always study this late?" he asked. "Not always," she admitted. "Tomorrow, don't wait for me. Just go to sleep," he said firmly. "I wasn't waiting," she countered. "Fine. Maybe you're studying, but it doesn't have to be this late," he added before heading to change. Her phone buzzed, and she turned. It was Sohn. She hurriedly declined the call. "Why didn't you answer?" Junyong questioned. "It was an unknown number," she lied. The phone rang again. "Don't ignore it. If someone's calling this late, it could be urgent," Junyong suggested. Reluctantly, she answered. "Hello, Yun." Sokin's voice came through. "Do you even know what time it is?" she scolded, frustrated. "I just want to chat," he admitted sheepishly. "If it's not urgent, I'm hanging up." "I'm moved, remember?" she reminded him. "Are you sharing a room with someone?" he asked suspiciously. Glancing at Junyong, she replied, "Yes, I have a roommate. Don't call me randomly at night. Bye." Ending the call, she turned to Junyong. "It wasn't urgent. I'm going to bed now." "Okay. About the roommate. Did you mean me?" he asked. "Well, more or less," she muttered. "Good night." He stood there speechless. The next morning, Junyong went for his usual early morning run. Yunil woke up alone, glancing at the empty sofa. He wakes up so early and comes home so late. Is it really okay for him to sleep on the couch every night? She wondered, feeling guilty. Later that night, past 1 a.m., Junyong returned quietly, noticing Yoon Seol fast asleep with her phone resting beside her. "For the past few days, I told you not to wait for me," he thought. "But when your roommate is here, you're talking to Sookin instead." His gaze darkened as he stared at the phone. Frustrated, he turned to change into his nightwear. After returning, he bent down to move her phone. Sensing movement, Yunil stirred. "Junyong, are you home?" she whispered sleepily. Caught off guard, he replied, "Oh, this isn't what you think. I was just moving your phone." "I wasn't thinking anything," she assured him softly. "I just wanted to say, what if you didn't sleep on the couch?" He froze, surprised. "I thought about it," she explained. "It's inconsiderate to make you sleep on the couch every night. I only made that rule because I thought there'd be separate beds, but we only have one bed, and it's not fair." Seeing him still frozen, she asked, "What's wrong? Are you sure?" "Of course, I won't do anything strange. I just don't want to make you uncomfortable," he said cautiously. Turning her face slightly, she replied, "I'm not afraid. It's just this position feels a bit awkward." She glanced back at him, noticing the faint smile forming on his lips. "But be warned, I have a habit of kicking in my sleep," she added playfully. Junyong settled on the other side of the bed. Turning her back to him, she thought, "What am I doing letting him sleep here?" Closing her eyes, she reassured herself, "Relax, Yunio. Just think of it as camping at school." Suddenly, Junyong pulled her gently into his arms from behind. "What are you doing?" she whispered sharply. He whispered back, "If we sleep like this, you won't kick me, and I don't want you moving to the sofa after I fall asleep." His warmth surrounded her, leaving her unable to argue. Slowly, she closed her eyes, letting herself relax as they both drifted into peaceful sleep in each other's embrace. Next morning, as Junyong walked, memories of the previous night kept playing in his mind, bringing a small smile to his lips. Upon reaching home, he headed straight to the bedroom. "Yunil, what time is your class today? Should we go together?" he called out. However, the room was empty. He called for her and checked every part of the house, but she was nowhere to be found. Concerned, he asked his mother, "Oh, she mentioned having an assignment and left early. Didn't she inform you?" His mother replied casually. He stood there unable to respond. At college, Yoon Seol and Sokin walked together, sipping their coffee. "This is so refreshing," Yoon Seol commented. "Did you get enough sleep? Or did you have a fight with your roommate?" So teased. "Not really a fight. It's just that we slept together for the first time," she thought, recalling how unexpectedly comfortable she felt sleeping beside Junyo. His embrace made me feel safe. Feeling awkward about seeing him in the morning, she had deliberately left before he woke up. Suddenly, So asked, "Hey, your roommate, is she my type?" You're always taking advantage of every situation, Yun scolded disdainfully. What's wrong with being curious? I just want to know more about her, he defended. Yangun raised her hand and admitted, Oh, I've met her. Really? Tell me more about her. Soken urged eagerly. Well, she's both beautiful and handsome at the same time with black hair, she described thoughtfully. Soken turned to Yoon Seol. Please introduce me to her. We're friends, after all, he requested with a playful grin. At that moment, Junyong approached the group. Good afternoon, he greeted. Everyone except Yunil responded. Good afternoon, Mr. Kong. Their eyes met, and tension rose between them. So, unaware of their relationship, started chatting with Junyong, causing Gyeonggun to comment quietly. Looks like his wish came true. Meeting your roommate. Noticing Junyong's ring, Soken asked curiously, Mr. Kong, you're wearing a ring. Are you married? Startled, Yunil quickly turned back. Thinking fast, Gyeonggun interjected. Oh, if I'm not mistaken, that's a military service ring, right? Yes, I've seen it before, Yoon Seol added hurriedly, playing along. So, believing them, grabbed Yoon Seol's hand. People really fancy rings these days. See, Yoon Seol's wearing one too. Frustrated, she pulled her hand back. I told you last night that I've seen people wearing rings like this at the club, too, so added, still clueless. Junyong silently observed the interaction, his sharp gaze fixed on them. Noticing his intense stare, Yunil felt pressured. Is he angry? Is there something we need to discuss? She wondered. At home that evening, Yunil cautiously asked, Why were you wearing the ring today? Aren't you supposed to be covering it up? Aren't you wearing yours too? He countered. Yes, but I'm at least covering it up with other rings, she explained. Why? Are you afraid Soken will notice? He asked pointedly. Why you bring him up? She shot back. Because Junyong paused, realizing he shouldn't let emotions interfere in their contract marriage. Without another word, he grabbed her hand firmly. Never take off this ring, he commanded. Her eyes widened, her face flushing red at his intense behavior. Pulling her hand free, she barked. Why are you acting like this? Are you playing with my feelings or something? Playing with what? You're my wife. According to our contract, he retorted. You're the one who insisted on a marriage without emotions. Are you just following the contract? Or what about your feelings? She challenged. He froze, unable to find an answer. Later that night, as they lay in bed, Junyong reflected, Feelings? They're irrelevant. Everything I'm doing is just fulfilling my role as her husband. Plenty of couples survive without involving feelings. I should have said that, but why couldn't I? The next morning at breakfast, Mrs. Kong asked, Have you two planned your honeymoon yet? It's not good to delay it for too long after marriage. Junyong, don't be too busy. Take your wife on vacation. We're thinking of going to Guam, Yoon Seol replied. That's great, Mr. Kong exclaimed. So, when are you planning to go? At the beginning of summer? Mrs. Kong asked enthusiastically. Yes, that's right, Junyong agreed. We're still adjusting the dates based on my project, Yunil added. Then let's go shopping this weekend, Mrs. Kong suggested cheerfully. Hesitantly, Yunil nodded. Okay, Mom. Later at the mall, Yunil tried on a beautiful dress selected by Mrs. Kong. Mom, I think t-shirts and shorts are enough, she protested. You can buy what you want later, but I want to buy this for you. You look absolutely stunning in it, Mrs. Kong insisted warmly. Thank you, Mom, Yunil said sincerely. While we're out, shall we grab dinner together? Mrs. Kong suggested. Oh, I'd love that, Yunil replied excitedly. As they were leaving, someone called from behind. Yunil. Hi, Sue. They both turned, and Yunil froze, shocked to see Sujin standing there. Oh, it's really you. Long time no see, Auntie, Sujin greeted warmly. Her eyes drifted toward Yunil, widening in surprise. Yunil, what are you doing with Aunt Haisuk? Yunil stood there frozen, struggling to respond. Oh, Sujin, it's you. I thought it was someone else, she stammered. But Mrs. Kong quickly recalled their agreement to keep the marriage a secret on campus. Aunt Haisuk is my mom's friend, and we met by accident earlier, Yunil explained nervously. Oh, really? Did you know she's Mr. Kang's mother? Sujin asked. No, I didn't know that, Yunil lied. Later, Sujin asked Mrs. Kong. Aunt, can we have a meal together? Oh, sorry, but I already have plans with my family, Mrs. Kong replied politely. Oh, that means Ju and Yang's coming too. Can I join you, Aunt? Sujin asked eagerly. Mrs. Kong hesitated, unsure how to respond. Sensing the tension, Yoon Seol quickly interjected. I'm sorry, but I have a group assignment due. I should leave now. Thank you for today, Aunt. She hurried off as Mrs. Kong called after her. Yunil. But Sujin interrupted. So, which restaurant are we going to, Aunt? Later, while waiting for the bus, Yunil thought, now what should I do? I can't head straight home because I told Junyang's mother I had a group assignment. She'll worry if I'm late. It's better to let her know I'll be home soon. Her mind drifted back to Sujin. I didn't realize Sujin was so close to Junyang's family. As she walked down the street, a car approached from behind. Yunil, I thought I saw you, Soken called out, stepping out of the car. What are you doing here? She asked, surprised. I was just dropping someone off at the dorm, he explained casually. He glanced at her outfit and teased. Why are you dressed like that? Were you on a blind date or attending a wedding? I was just out, she replied awkwardly. Where are you heading now? You haven't eaten dinner yet, right? Let's grab something together, he suggested enthusiastically, grabbing her hand and pulling her along. Meanwhile, at TJ Corp, Junyong sat at his desk, staring at his phone. His friend Minjin noticed and approached. What are you looking at? My mom sent me the restaurant's address, Junyong replied. Minjin chuckled. Isn't that place famous for dates? Maybe she wants you to join them since she's with Yoon Seol. Realizing the possibility, Junyong stood up abruptly. Thanks, Minjin, he said, leaving quickly. Yoon Seol didn't seem in a good mood earlier. Maybe this will cheer her up. At the restaurant, A hostess directed Junyong to a private room. He entered, ready to surprise Yoon Seol. "Oh, Junyong, you're here." Mrs. Kong greeted warmly. "Yes, Mom," he replied, taking a seat. He turned and blinked in surprise. "Sujin, what are you doing here? Weren't you shopping, Mom?" Sujin smiled brightly. "We bumped into each other earlier. We even saw Choi Yoon Seol, but she left. You know her, right?" she added casually. Junyong's expression darkened as he quickly pulled out his phone. He typed a message to Yoonil. "Where are you? Are you okay? Shall I come pick you up?" Unable to suppress his worry, he abruptly stood up. "I'm sorry, but something urgent just came up." He excused himself, leaving hurriedly while dialing her number. When Yoonil finally answered, he spoke sharply. "Yoonil, are you okay? I called you so many times." She sounded calm on the other end. "I'm in front of the campus. I'll be a little late, meeting with a friend before heading home." Junyong's shoulders tensed as he heard a familiar voice in the background. "So, she's with Soken, and here I was worried about her. But why do I feel so unsettled?" At the restaurant, Soken excused himself to wash his hands while Yoon Seol sat alone. "Thank you, Soken," she called out. "No problem. We're friends, Yoon Seol," he replied cheerfully. As she waited, her eyes fell on her wedding ring.